Hello and welcome to our webinar, How to Create Targeted Optimized Content, Congree and Quickterm. Klaus, thank you that we can do the webinar together. Before we start, we have a housekeeping slide, the obligatory one. All the participants are muted, but please feel free to ask questions anytime. There's a questions feature in the webinar tool. You can also use it to raise a hand if you want to highlight your question or give feedback. And the webinar will be recorded so we can provide it afterwards. Okay. Regarding the agenda for the webinar today, we plan to provide you 4 topics in a row. First of all, we would like to provide you an overview about the topic in general. What is the goal of this webinar? What topics do we want to showcase today? What is the motivation behind it? Then we would like to show as much as possible using demos, like how to collect term candidates in the actual content process. Then we move on to the terminology validation. That's actually when you process the term candidate and manage your terminology. And as a final step, we basically have a look at how to use this result that we developed when creating new content. Okay. A short introduction of our companies and the presenters. I'm from Congree. Congree is a software vendor. We produce software that is used to check your content that is written in a company. And the goal is to have unique content for your corporate that follows your wording and your style guide. And for this, we produce editor plugins for all sorts of editing environments, as well as browser extensions, so that wherever you create content in your company, you can check if you are writing according to your terminology, to your specific words, to your wording, and to your writing style guide, so that you can showcase your corporate identity using your textual content. And this is a perfect match for Kaleidoscope. Klaus, please
which is the cue for me to take over. So I am Klaus. I am founder and CEO of Kaleidoscope. Our claim to fame is taking your content global. So we also deal with corporate content, but with a focus on multilingual, global content. And we offer a wide portfolio of software solutions and services that range from component-based content management systems, so how to structure and create content. Of course, this includes terminology and making sure that this content is terminologically and stylistically, etc., correct, which is the topic of today's webinar. We also have software to optimize your translation processes, and we have software and services. Everything we do is software and services to deliver the content and to manage content quality. In a nutshell, that is what Kaleidoscope does. Who am I? I always like to present myself as a terminological entry. Of course, I am a terminology aficionado, so how else would I present myself? So this is me. My preferred name is Klaus Fleischmann. You can see there are a few other ones, but please don't use them for the reason stated. In our company, I focus on product management and sales. So these are my core things that I do essentially at Kaleidoscope. But as a CEO, of course, you end up being responsible for everything. From the very beginning, we have been very much focused on Trados, RWS, SDL, whatever the name was at any given period in time. But of course, we have a much bigger partner ecosystem, one of which, of course, is Congree. But there are many others like Quanos, like Fodina, etc. The world is trending towards ecosystems, particularly in the software area. So we are running along with that. That's me. And back over to you, Alex.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Alex, or Alexander Becker. I'm the head of sales at Congree. From my background, I am a computational linguist. So I focus on the processing of natural language using computer programs. I'm more on the applied science side, so I like the actual consulting part within our company. I like to dive into the technical details. And when I started in 2012 with Congree, I actually started in the consulting department and later on moved to the sales department. And yeah, well, today we will also have a hands-on demo on the topics mentioned. Before we start, let's have a big picture of what we are talking about. So we presented us as two companies, and basically the core assets we are talking today about are on the slide. So on the left-hand side, we basically have the core aspects of the Kaleidoscope Quickterm platform. That is a sophisticated terminology management tool, including workflows and deliverables. And here we have 5 core components. So within your company, you have specific vocabulary, and you kind of have a need on managing those words. So at some point in time, you have the request for a term management, how to propose them. Then terminology is not something that one person does alone. Usually you have to agree upon your terms with other people in your company, with other stakeholders. So you have a need to discuss the items as well. And finally, also to approve them, and by approving also to make them available to your company, because you invested work into gaining those term candidates, discussing them, approving them. So you also want to have a benefit out of it by using it. Usually you also have a translation process in this chain. That is, if you define it in English, for example, a term, then you might also want to have a translation in German so that it's clear that if you have translation processes in your company from documents from English to German, for example, how to translate this particular term to the other language. And in the end, you also have the rollout. That is, you created the terminology, but you also want to make sure that it is used across your company or within your company. And that's one of the aspects where Congree comes in. That's on the right-hand side. So whenever you create content in your company, like in Word, for example, if you just sketch a document, or within your web CMS, if you showcase your products, or even within your product information management system, if you describe the product attributes of your products, then you create content that is provided to customers as external communication, as well as content that is used for internal communications to communicate with other teams and other team members. And this communication should use the same wording so that it's clear what you're talking about, to have a common understanding of what you are talking about. And this is where the Congree platform can make use of the terminology you agreed upon and use it to immediately check your content when you are writing it. And those two aspects, that's what we are going to show you today basically on a technical level. Before we start with this, there's also, of course, the other perspective, the other top-level perspective about what we are talking in general about regarding terminology.
Right, and that is, of course, my topic. So what is terminology management? If you look at it, I have defined it with a little bit of help from Uwe Mügge, who has phrased this very succinct definition of what terminology management is. And it's basically a process. That is an important thing. Of course, a lot of English speakers say, well, that's because we are Germanic, so we love processes. But still, it has to do with processes if you are talking about a corporate environment. And the goal of the process really is to guide content creators of any kind. That can be technical authors, translators, of course, but it can also be people who work in a PIM system or who put some label onto a graphical user interface of a software, or UX specialists, all of the people that create content internally or externally. And we want to make sure that they are using consistently the correct wording. And how do you do that in a term base? Typically, we talk about concepts. So what we define in a term base really is a concept, or you could say a thing. maybe a product or a feature or something like that. So for example, here we have the single piston brake caliper. This is something used to slow down a motorcycle, and we have defined what it is. So it's yeah, there's a definition there. There's an image there pointing at where you can find that on your motorcycle. So you can make sure that you are really using the word for the correct thing. And at the same time, you can also make sure that you are consistent, because of course we collect variants of this or synonyms of this. For example, the one-pot brake caliper, but we label them as please do not use this particular synonym. And this information is interesting, of course, for somebody who is in the term base looking at this, so for a human being, but it is also very important for software such as Congree, because then you can detect this and see if somebody is writing one-pot brake caliper in a text. You can flag it and say, hey, you're using something that we have specifically not allowed. Please use single piston brake caliper instead. And of course, in the term base, you do this in all languages. So here you have a few other languages. Why do we do that? What is the purpose of managing terminology? Well, we want to create content. We want to create information that is easily readable, that is user-friendly. We don't want to intentionally confuse our audience. But in recent years, there have been some other, let's say, trends in the world that have really helped terminology become a little bit more mainstream. One of them is content marketing or search engine optimization or findability. Even in technical contexts, in technical documentation, people very often just use their cell phone nowadays and Google some they have with their product. And if you don't know what they're Googling for, then they're not going to find your content. Of course, we are currently in the AI hype, in the Gen AI hype. We are going to hit the valley of tears eventually and then come up with useful products. But one thing that has become clear already, even if you only played with ChatGPT, for example, which pretty much everybody has now, I guess, who actually has a smartphone, you will realize very quickly that not only is it sometimes factually wrong, it's hallucinating, but also it is very often terminologically inconsistent and incorrect. So it becomes very clear that feeding these models with correct terminology is something that is really important. And then a little bit older, maybe content management systems or component-based, fragment-based content management systems. They also need terminology because with these systems, you kind of lose the notion of a document. So you can't really proofread a document anymore from page 1 to page 400 because it just doesn't exist anymore. It gets assembled on the fly. So these are the goals. I often get asked, what are the risks, or are there any risks of not doing terminology, of not managing your terminology? So I thought about this a little bit and came up with one or the other risk. Here they are. I'm not going to read them to you. You can take a screenshot or ask for the PDF. There's a lot of things that, of course, are at risk and are actually of quantifiable risk and monetary risks even. So yeah, look at this. In terms of costs, I often get asked, of course, well, but terminology costs money. How do I tell my boss that we need money for this? So we obviously need money to just keep terminology alive, to keep the workflow alive, keep the software there, train users. It's costly to come up with the content of terminology, so with the terms themselves, because you need to discuss with colleagues, you need to answer questions and ask questions. You need to make sure everybody approves the concept. You need to change it because language changes and your products change. And of course, this multiplies with the amount of languages. And of course, even using terminology, if you're an author and you're checking a text, for example, or you're just looking something up, that is time. So that also costs money. But as I always like to say, you already have those costs in your companies. You can just click once, Alex. You already have the terminology processes and all the terminology work and efforts they are going on, but typically that is a process that is hidden, it's uncontrolled, it's not organized, it's not documented, which also means it can't be optimized. And this should be, a horrific thought for any management position or any C-level position, that you have a process that is all over the place, but it's undocumented, it's unorganized. So this also means that you won't be able to effectively optimize that process, and eventually not managing terminology in the long term is actually more expensive than starting to manage it. Or put in a very philosophical way on the next slide, good old Austrian by the name of Paul Watzlawick. If you don't know him, Google him, because he wrote some really fun to read philosophical books. But one of the things he said, is you cannot not communicate. Something, by the way, that makes authoring tools stumble a little bit, because of course it's a strange sentence from a readability perspective. But what of course he's trying to do is, even if you try not to communicate, you are still communicating. Lack of interest or whatever you're communicating. And you could take that statement and put it on top of terminology and say, well, actually, in a company, you cannot not have terminology. That simply doesn't exist, because you need to communicate about your things. But what you can do is you can decide that you want to manage it efficiently and effectively and introduce a process. And again, in the long term, not managing your terminology is more expensive. So that's what we're talking about. And with that, let's look at the first part of our trilogy of today's demo. And I hand back over to you, Alex.
Perfect, thank you. Well, with that said, let's have a look on how we actually do this. So how do we extract term candidates? How much effort is it? And how do the follow-up processes look like? For this, let's have a look on a typical content creation scenario, one by word and one as we have the generative AI hype. Maybe let's start with a generative AI case. So for example, we could use our generative AI feature and ask it to generate maybe some sentences about how a device works to record brainwaves. Would you please describe the background of this question, of course, is that as a showcase, we created documents for a fictional company that actually does create those devices. You put it on your head, and then it measures your brainwaves. And if you read the content, then it will tell you how readable the content was. Unfortunately, such devices do not exist, but as soon until they are available, you could use Congree to at least check something similar. So in the end, we have a generated content from the AI. We can apply to the editor and automatically check if there's something to say to this text. Looks fine. So this could be one of the aspects how you could create content. There is a drawback of this approach that is as follows. If you ask a generative AI to create content for you, this is some default content. So it's not branded to your company, to your brand. And it's just some good, valid content, but it does not follow your wording, it does not follow your style guide. So basically everyone can create this content. And the issue is that if you have a brand, if you have a company producing specialized products, you usually would like to use a specific wording and a specific writing style to make you identifiable as a specific company. And you need this as a differentiator for your competitors so that it's clear, this is content from a particular brand, and that's a brand I'm going to be tied to. That's what Klaus already said about SEO. So customers tend to inform themselves via the internet, checking content on their own as they like. They are not forced to read your marketing materials. They will find other contents like your manuals, for example, as well. And if they like what they find, then they will remember the brand and the kind how you presented yourself to the customer using your company text. And this is why it is so important to have control about how the words are used or which words are used and how you actually write your sentences. And here in this example, for example, we can already see that we have feedback about this text. That is, we defined for our company that we actually would like to use instrument instead of device. There even is information about this in the terminology, so we can have a look at it and see that device or the actual concept, instrument and device has a specific definition. So this is how we can provide information to our users within the company how to use terminology. And they can easily apply with a click to the editor, and then the content will be rechecked and only the other occurrence will be flagged. So this is how the terminology check actually works. And in the same process, you also have term candidates. So in this particular text, I just created it. There is 3 new items that's not yet in our terminology database. For example, I have the electrical activity. I have the analysis. That's a discussable proposal maybe. And I have the brain function. And all those are new technical terms I just created using generative AI that are not yet defined in our term base. Maybe they are standard language, then you can tell the software that it is not special vocabulary within your company. But if it is, you can use this term candidate extraction feature to easily submit your term candidates to the process. A similar situation happens if you just use Word and start creating your content. For example, let's imagine we start a new fact sheet. And let's say or maybe a blog post like facts about brainwave detection devices. Again, I do the issue with using the wrong term by saying device instead of instrument, and I get immediate feedback about the term. And I also get, sorry?
And you haven't learned that you're not supposed to say device.
Yeah. next time I will remember it. And on the other side, I can see that I already have the term candidate detected here. This term candidate detection actually uses linguistic mechanics to decide what to propose. So facts, for example, is not proposed as a term candidate because it's not a complex word form, so it's just a single word form. And the more complex the word forms are, which means compounded word forms usually represent complex word forms, the more likely it is that it's actually technical vocabulary within your company that has a specialized meaning. And so we look for multi-word word forms, and only if those indicators are present, we actually provide a proposal for this word form. So for example, if I create a new sentence and say brainwave, or the brainwave is measured, for example, okay, so now I have it. Then again, I get a proposal for brainwave because brainwave is again one of those multi-word forms. And a frequency is not an indicator for this mechanic. Actually, as you can see, it's only 2 sentences, so there is no frequency indicator used here. It's only the linguistic information that is used to decide is something a term candidate or not. Of course, we also do part of speech detection, so we really focus on nouns. We don't have a look at verbs or something like this. And what you might also see in this panel is that you can also supply additional information. Those fields are actually based on the data model in your term base. So if you if you decided on what information is relevant for you, like do we need definitions? Yes, you do. Or do we need information about the division where a product is located, or maybe a usage node? Then you have a data model in your term base. And sometimes you already want to ask your proposal givers to provide or to supply this information. And you can use the data model and show it in this form. You can decide which attributes to show so that it's easy to provide feedback. It even is possible to define that you kind of have to supply information in a particular field in order to be able to even submit a term candidate. And the idea behind this is, for example, for the definition proposal, if you have to get back to the people proposing terms anyway, all the time, and ask, what did you mean when you proposed this term? Why is it relevant? Then you might also decide to make it a mandatory field so that you have to supply some definition proposal in order to propose the term. It just streamlines a bit your workflow. You can then submit a term candidate either one by one or select all and submit all of them. It's also possible to just open up a small form and propose something randomly that you have in mind as well that might fit the situation as well. So you are not forced to type it in your editor. Those term candidate proposals, which are kind of easy to submit. So when you submitted a term candidate proposal from the point of view of a writer, of someone creating content in your company, you are done with the process. The proposal is there, and the institution or the process that takes care of handling those proposals now takes over, and they will evaluate if it is terminology or not. We are now switching a bit to perspective. I just want you to show you where those candidates arrive. By default, they are collected on Congree side in a big list. And here you have one decision to make. You can decide, do you want to add it as a proposal to the workflow, or is it standard language and should not be added as a term proposal? Then you would discard the term candidate. So there are two buttons for this, and that's all you can do here. All the heavy work, like deciding on the definition, setting attributes, that's done in Quickterm. You will see this in a second. Here you just have this decision. The background of this decision is as follows. If you discard an item here, it will be added to the term candidate filter of Congree and not be proposed again. There is also an option by now that we can use to automatically forward a term candidate to the term proposal workflow. Then the candidates are not collected in this list. They are immediately created within Quickterm as a proposal. And you don't have to visit this list as an administrator. The workflow is a bit different. Then in that case, we basically ask Quickterm about the decisions. Did you accept the proposal or not? And if a proposal was discarded, then we fetch this information from Quickterm and fill the term candidate filter using this information. Now let's submit the candidate and have a look at how this actually continues within the terminology management system.
Yeah, which is my cue to take back over again. So I'm gonna make myself the presenter. That's always fun to do. And I'll also show one slide before I jump into the demo, and just so we understand well what does the software actually do. So if you look at the process that gets triggered from these candidates or requests, as we say, one thing I would like to mention is that this can come from many different sources. So Congree and the technical authoring team, or the authoring team that's using your software, Alex, that is one possible source, but it could be somebody who's just, for example, searching something in Quickterm and can't find it. Software developer, for example, who looks for the text that he's supposed to put on a button. Or it can also be that some division sends you an Excel file and says, oh, here are 300 new terms, please import them. Or it could be that you do an intentional term extraction. Let's say you crawl your website or your competitor's website or something like that. And from there, you harvest 200 new concepts. So many different sources, but typically that then goes into a process. And what I like to highlight here is that, of course, somebody needs to look at these things, because not everything that comes in here actually makes sense. For example, it could be that one of those, let's say the brainwave, that actually already is in the term base, but it just has a completely different term there. So it would be a synonym that you want to merge, and you want to put that, you want to add that new synonym to an existing concept. It could also simply be silly what comes through here, particularly if you completely automate that. You might get silly things. For example, your street address is something that is frequently extracted simply because it also meets the requirements, or it looks like a term, but of course it's not a term. And then you would have somebody who adds a little bit of metadata. Maybe you want to add a definition or the typical metadata, I don't know, subject matter area, whatever you have defined in your term base. But sometimes you already need help for that. So you need a subject matter person to help you, for example, with the definition, because even though you know a lot about a lot of things, if you are a terminologist, there are going to be things where you need help. And then you basically have a draft. So you say, well, I think this is a new concept. And then in our world, or in our vision of the workflow, our vision of the world of workflows, this then goes into some sort of an approval or discussion process. So you send it out to a terminology committee or something like that. And they then all say, yes, this is fine, or no, this is not fine. please change something. Of course, not every entry goes through all of these stages, but yeah, so some more important ones might. And at the end of the day, of course, it already is the end of the day here in Europe. Then it also goes into the target languages. So somebody suggests a translation, somebody checks it. Again, in the in-country review process, for example, you might then discuss this as well. And our software helps you with all of these things. So of course, in Quickterm, you can, as you said, you can maintain software. We can also extract software, or extract terms. Of course, we have a data model that you can adapt to your needs. That might also be changing. We have already brought AI into our tool as well. And we are very strong on the workflows, which I will show in a minute. Another aspect that we are particularly focused on with Quickterm is if you want to give access to your terminology, which of course makes sense, because I mean, why are you collecting it if you're not giving access to it? You will have to work with a lot of people who are not terminology experts. So typically only a handful of people in a company really understand terminology. All the other ones don't. So we need to make the complexity of language and of terminology easy to understand for, let's say, lay people, normal people who are not terminology geeks. And always you have to raise awareness, and you basically have to keep selling your term base in your company. And we want to make this easier for you with our software as well. Just to be complete, we also have a terminology verification module on the Quickterm side. So of course, Congree is the power tool for the professional authors, but every now and then you have use cases where you say, well, actually, you know, this person only needs it twice a year or once a month. It's an overkill to install Congree there or to teach them how it works. I just want to quickly check if the terminology is all right. And then that's a use case for our, let's say, little brother of Congree, as I like to call it. And another aspect that's very important and has become more important in recent years is the fact of integrating your terminology. So you have a lot of systems in your company, for example, Congree, but also, for example, translation tools, machine translation engines, generative AI engines, but you also have ERP systems and software development environments, etc. And all of these tools can consume terminology. So you want to push the terminology or integrate the terminology into these systems. And that is another aspect. Again, we're not going to talk about this today. And I will try to remember how I shared it this morning. I also had a hard time figuring out how I can actually now not share the PowerPoint slide, but share something else. How did I do it this morning? It's really interesting, because if I just click on share, it wants to share my PowerPoint. Here I figured it out again. Right, so as you can see, we received this term request here, the brainwave, with this beautifully meaningful example sentence that you added there. The brainwave is measured. Okay, good to know. I'm actually gonna, before I actually jump into the demo system that we both share, I'm gonna jump into a different system, which is the newer version that we have just released. So our demo server is not yet updated, because I also wanted to briefly show you some of the AI stuff that we recently put in. So what I can do here now as a terminologist, remember I'm in the step where the terminologist checks the input and checks this request and tries to figure out whether it actually makes sense and potentially adds information. So for example, what we can do now here is we can say, all right, well, I want to add things like the grammatical number, the gender, maybe the part of speech, these typical things. And of course, this is really easy for AI to figure out what is the grammatical number of brainwave. So I can click on this button here, and then it actually passes this over to generative AI, and it sends back, okay, this is singular. In English, that it is hallucinating again a little bit. Okay, forget about that. And the part of speech, that should be a noun. Okay, grammatical gender is really rather pointless anyhow in English for almost all terms. But we can, for example, also generate a definition using generative AI. So we can do more or less sophisticated prompts here that say, okay, well, what is actually a brainwave? And it tells me quite a bit on brainwaves. Or if we want to have a funnier example, we can say, well, maybe it would be really nice to be able to explain terminology using poems or limericks. So here we can create a quick limerick on the brainwave. Again, this is supposed to be funny, but you could create a very technical definition, or let's say an explanation in more lay people's words, for example. Coming back to our actual demo environment, so I'm going to actually also add a little bit of information here on this term. So I can also, for example, say, well, the part of speech is a noun in this case. But what's most important, of course, is the usage. So is brainwave actually allowed or not? And I can either decide that myself, or as you remember, I can send this to a specialist now, or to a group of specialists or subject matter experts, and say, please discuss this, make other suggestions. Maybe there are other suggestions for brainwave, or for example, if this is a product name, make some suggestions, and then we can vote on it. So here I'm just going to say this is preferred. Or similarly for the definition, for example, I could of course create the definition myself, but I can also assign this to somebody else. Like maybe I have a group of people who are the subject matter experts on brainwave, so I can send that to them and say, please come up with a definition. So for example, yeah, it warns me that it's empty. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. So for example, what I can do is I can assign this to my technical documentation team, and I can say, please, okay, it was empty, so I need to add the empty definition now. Please discuss and come up with a definition. I can send a comment along telling them what they need to do. I can give it a deadline, because of course in a workflow you need deadlines, and then off we go. And now this is nothing I currently have to work on, so it disappears from my to-do list because I sent this to the technical documentation team. So I'm going to briefly log in as Ted, who is my tech doc person, simply because it also starts with TE. So I'm going to log in here, hopefully, yeah. And oh, in the morning the demo was in German, so it remembered that Ted wants this in German. Let me briefly switch over to English. And then I have several tasks actually. So the new one is the one that is not read yet. So it's in boldface. So what did I get here? I got the brainwave. I can see, okay, they want a definition from me. There's also a comment. So yeah, this useful comment that I got from Teresa. I can now also chat. So for example, if we are several subject matter experts in this group, we can now start discussing this. I can also add somebody else. So for example, I could involve marketing and say, hey, you guys from marketing, what do you think about this? But of course, I can also simply edit it, obviously. So I can go in here. And as you can see, this is a detail, but it's a very important detail. So Ted, in normal everyday usage of the term base, Ted does not actually have access or the access rights to edit terminology. Yeah? He's just a reader or a consumer of terminology, but he can't actually go in and edit anything, because that would be, I don't know, you would lose control of the content if you just let everybody write in there. But of course, since I gave him a task, they can now actually access the definition field and come up with a definition. So this is I don't know, whatever it is. And then I can, as I said, we could discuss with my colleagues here, what do you think? But in my demo, it's only me, so I'm going to say, yeah, I'm done. So I finalized this task. I also prepared a few other tasks just to show you what these other tasks look like. So for example, here in the morning demo, we were also discussing, well, should we call this new product that Alex's company invented, this content grasp software, what should we call this? And we had a discussion task here, so I can suggest additional terms. I can say I want to call this seems to be Hungarian, and then I can say, well, I strongly vote for this, and actually no, I changed my mind. I vote against this, and of course this only makes sense if there's more than one person voting. Otherwise, it's kind of strange. But the idea is my colleagues would log in, they also vote, and at the end of the day, the terminologist gets a result, and maybe 112 people vote for the Hungarian term. It's not really Hungarian, of course. And I don't know, 12 people vote for this one. So very likely this should then be the preferred term that I use as a terminologist. And at the end of the day, if everything is done, as I said, we might want to send out these approval tasks. So here I only want to know, is this okay for you, or do you have a problem with this? And if it's okay, I can say I approve it. And then this task is done. If it's not okay, I can actually reject it. But then in my demo, I also configured that then I do want to have a reason. Otherwise, what am I going to do as a terminologist if people just reject it but don't tell me why? So that's kind of what the workflow looks like. So everybody has a task list. That's very important. The terminologist can always track what's going on. So as a terminologist, I can also look into my task lists. And I currently have a filter set here on only show me things where I actually have something to do. So for example, here I got this approval task back and this was rejected. So I now have to do something about it. Or here, for example, I got this edit task back. So they came up with this wonderful definition and I can now agree with it, disagree with it. I can also chat with them. Yeah, so here I can see what they actually discussed. Maybe I can make them change their mind. But if this is actually okay for me, then I can just import the change manually, or we can also do that automatically if you want to do that automatically. And then at some point for Alex, I'm actually going to also include a forbidden term. Oh my God, what could be a forbidden term for a brain wave? It could be a brain impulse, maybe, I don't know, something like that. So that I'm going to set to deprecated, so it's forbidden. Save that, and then I actually create it in the term base. And with creating it in the term base, I can finalize the term request. So that basically means an email now goes to the person who requested it. But now it's actually in the term base. So if I search for it, if I search for the brainwave, I can actually find it here. And my users can also find it here. So remember, we also want to give access to the terminology. And in order to make terminology more easily graspable, we have this splash screen or starting page or dashboard, as we call it, because you can also put your to-do lists on here, etc. So the idea is we want to make it really easily digestible for users. They immediately get useful information. So for example, here we have a post on the mind reader, and actually it's linked to the term base. So if I click on here, I am immediately in that particular entry, and I can read about this. The beautiful AI generated image, of course, of the Compathy mind reader. Or if you want to go all the way into gamification, you can even do quizzes. Yeah, so do you know? Well, it's a silly question because it says right here. So we're mainly testing whether people are able to read, but maybe they're not, and they say, oh no, this is the correct name. And then no, it's actually not the correct name. And this is a gamification aspect, but at the end of the day, you're also teaching the concept of terminology to these users. And you make it more interesting, you make it appealing. The idea is maybe they come back in a week and see, well, what new posts do we have about our products or about our language? And of course, you have them immediately inside the term base. And they can look at actually what does this look like in the term base. We have all kinds of different style sheets that you can use here. We also have a concept map, so you can navigate around. Oops, this is a bit small here on my screen. Centralize it, it's still very small. Let me get rid of this, then you can read at least something. Also, it's displaying some of the stuff in German. But basically, the idea is here you can provide kind of like knowledge graphs or basically a network of how are these things all interrelated. So for example, the Compathy content grasp thing consists of different parts. So the headset is part of it, and the content grasp software is part of it, and also the remote control is set to German because I forgot to change the settings for the English-speaking webinar. And we also have a taxonomy. So similarly, you can navigate this using the taxonomy. So for example, I could say, well, I'm only interested in hardware items, and then you basically get all the hardware items that have to do with Compathy. So that's a little bit the user interface when you want to do the searches. And yeah, I think with that, back over to you, Alex. So we have enough time to also see, you know, how would an author actually use this terminology? Because of course, requiring them to go in here, search for all the words that they are using and making sure they are all correct, that is not a very good user experience, let's put it that way. So let's see how we can make this a little bit better. And for that, I will pass the moderator rights back to you. And then you should be able to share your screen. There you are.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, then let's now have a look how to use the terminology we just agreed upon. And before we do this, I would like to quickly highlight what the language check actually does behind the scenes. So when we created content in the editor in the first part of the demo, behind the scenes, the content was checked in real time. So if you interact with your editor, the check is immediately checking for writing violations. And this is done by a linguistic engine. This linguistic engine, when you create content, it checks for your sentence boundaries, your word boundaries, and it also checks the actual word forms and also does a morphological analysis. So it checks how the parts of your words are formed. As an example, I have the word from reactivations, and when our software analyzes this word, we find out that there's a prefix that it's derived from the stem active and that there's derivational affixes. I'm sorry, I forgot the S at the end. That's of course also included here. And that's linguistic knowledge we have about the language. We also have knowledge about grammatical structures and how sentences should look like. And using this linguistic knowledge, so that's the linguistic intelligence part of our software, we can do all sorts of language checks, like, for example, of course, spelling and grammar. That's more like the baseline check. But you can also check for writing style, for example, based on your company style guide or your tone of voice style guide that defines how content should be written when you talk to your customers. And of course, part of this usually is terminology, so your particular terms that you define in the company. The information about this morphological analysis level is because it has an effect on how we can recognize terminology. So let's assume you define certain terms in your term base, like the items listed on the right side of this table, like terminology panel. Then based on this fact, as we, for example, just added brainwave to the term base, we can find certain variations automatically. If we add terminology panel to the term base and someone writes the information is displayed in the panel for terminology, that's a syntactic variation of your term. And you do not need to add this variation to your term base and say this is deprecated, please use terminology panel. Congree can find this automatically. So just based on the fact that we define terminology panel in our term base, the other variant is found automatically. And this happens for certain situations. For example, we have another syntactic variation, in this case for a word from that consists of more than 2 words. For example, gauge pressure measurement is the actual term in our term base. And if someone writes measurement for gauge pressure, here you can see it's pressure and not, I was wrong. So we have measurement for gauge pressure. So that's a syntactic variation as well, but it includes an additional word again, and we find this as well as a syntactic variation of our term. Here's some other example. An interesting aspect is the synonym recognition. For example, we can find synonyms where we use engine and motor as synonyms. And this is based on a synonym lexicon. So when we ship our product, there's a list of synonyms that is already included. You could even adjust it. For example, if you would like to add a synonym like computer and server, and say all terms where server or computer as a part of the term, synonyms using the other variant should be found automatically. It extends the recognition mechanics of the term recognition. So if we have gasoline motor in our term base, based on the synonym knowledge, we find out that gasoline engine is basically the same. And to go back to the previous example, if we would set up a synonym relation between fuel and gasoline, this mechanic would be extended. So if you would write something like mix of gasoline, this is a syntactic variation and a synonym variation of fuel and mix, and Congree will find out about this and show you a message and tell you, hey, please don't do this. And for this kind of recognition to work, we do basically inspect the linguistic representation of your terms. Have a look at them, how are your terms formed, and then match them with the underlying linguistic representations of your content. And that's how the linguistic variant recognition works. And so it doesn't matter if you use a form in a plural or if you create your nominal phrase in a different syntactic variation, we can find out about this using this variant recognition. So now I would like to highlight the technical aspect, how the linguistic engine actually learns about the terms. So we just have seen the process in Quickterm, how to define brainwave and its synonyms. And within Quickterm, we have the data majority. So this is where you define your terminology. Here you manage your terms, you also manage your data model, you define your attributes. And there's one in particular important attribute for the Congree language check in order to check your terms. That is the usage attribute. Congree language check per concept needs a preferred form, and you can have arbitrary admitted terms and deprecated terms. And whenever you write one of those, we will show a message to the writer and say, hey, that's a variation or it's forbidden, please use the preferred form. Now, this attribute, the usage, this is actually something that almost every customer somehow names somewhat else. Some say usage, some say term status. And then it's also possible to have different names for this for the actual attribute value. So if you would like to indicate that it's a preferred form, you could just add an attribute that's named pref. Or you could actually name it preferred form, or if you have a look at the deprecated forms, you could name it do not use, for example, as well. And this is also something customer specific as the data as well. So every customer usually has its own set of vocabulary that is special for this company. And now there's a learning process. Basically, it's called term sync. It fetches the terminology from the database. It's a deep integration, so we talk to the APIs of Quickterm and ask for the terms to be provided to Congree. This process works automatically. Usually it's executed once per day, but you can also execute it on demand. So if you have a really important change, you can just click a button and then it's learned immediately. And this process also has an attribute mapping. Right? Basically translate your custom usage attribute and maybe other attributes like grammatical attributes, which might be interesting for languages like German or French. It translates them to the linguistic engine so that we know what is the name of your usage attribute and what is the attribute value name of your preferred form and the admitted term and deprecated forms. Once this is known, so this is configured once when we set up the environment and the integration, then the linguistic engine can learn about your terminology. And when it does this, it takes all of your terms and does the linguistic analysis and the morphologic analysis for all of your terms and creates some kind of offline index. We use this to be able to check your content in real time. So if you type something, you stop typing and then immediately Congree provides you a result if you are writing according to your term base and according to your style guide. So this is really fast, and in order to do it in this speedy manner, we have to analyze your terms in advance to know what is in your terminology and to be able to do this sophisticated term check. And that's what this term sync job does. There's one thing I would like to highlight. In a terminology, you usually do not only have standard words of the language. Sometimes you also have product names like TermSync, for example. That's a camel case name. It has the uppercase S in the middle of the name, and that's not standard English language. So usually, if it would be standard English, there would be a white space in between. So that's a fictional name, a product name. And of course, they are found in this process as well. So they are identified and they are then added to the so-called user lexicon, because you can make them known to the software as well. You can even make known certain forms of those word forms. So if you also would like to make known a plural form of TermSync with a tailing S, for example, then you can add this to the user lexicon as well. And that's how you can make known your own custom non-standard language names to the software. Okay, that's it. Let's have a look at it. Let's imagine we are working on a document. Maybe there exists already some content Then you open it up, and as you can see, Congree automatically started as an editor plugin. We have two toolbars, one on the left side, one on the right side, and we have a toolbar. Of course, you can rearrange those panels. So if you don't like to use that much of a space, you can just align them on one side. So for demonstration proposals, I tend to show them as two panels so that we can see both results at the same time. The usage concept in general is that if you click in your document or interact with your document in some sort, clicking or writing something, changing something, inserting something, removing something, Congree realizes this editor interaction, and the parts you have touched, like as I just clicked to reviewers here, that is checked. So to make this a bit visible, when I clicked on reviewers, everything from the beginning of this paragraph to the end of this paragraph was checked. And we got results in the language check panel. The language check tells you, do you use your terms correct? And do you follow your writing style guide? Here, for example, we see that there is a writing style rule triggering. It says, oh, please don't use future tense. I configured a writing profile that is focused on technical documentation. Their future tense is not appropriate, so we get this flagged. We even get an example that shows us some indications how this could be improved, so that we can rework the sentence without this style violation. So this is how writing style would work. And as you can see, it's quite straightforward. You don't even have to think about it. You don't have to click some settings. You just start your editor and it's already turned on. You type something, maybe let's say, please use the brain. What was the term variant? Brain. Let's quickly check it because you can have a look at valid terms as well. So the software identified that brainwave is a valid term. And the other concept was brain impulse. Okay. So if we write something like, please use the brain, or please measure the brain impulse. Using the software. Then this was a change to the software. I added some content. It was immediately checked, and the check result was added to the language check report. The other messages are still in the document because I didn't fix them. So it's more like a chronological order. The first issue is the first one in the list, and I can move through those issues one by one and try to fix my issues. I can also see a general estimation on how good my content is already. I can see I have a release level of 0. It's a red indicator and it says unsafe. So there's a lot of critical issues in my document at the moment. And on the smaller report below, I can see the categories where I have violations. And in particular, I have 3 terminology violations. The style violations are green. They are not that critical. And there's this one grammar issue. So maybe let's hide the style messages for now and then focus on terminology. And then I can go to the terminology messages and fix them. The most critical issue actually is this one because it says, review this term. This is a deprecated term. We should not use it. And I get a correction proposal in green, which I can click. I also see the incorrect form again with a strike through markup, so I can immediately get a grasp on what did I do wrong and what's the correct form. If I then click on brainwave, the proposal is applied to the content, and as this again as a change to the document is checked again, or the particular section is checked again, and I get an updated list on the left side for the language check. Now, the interesting thing about the language check terminology messages like this one is that for every terminology message, I also get information in the terminology research. That is, for device, I can see that there are synonyms like instrument, I can see the definition, and I can maybe see term level attributes. I can even see this for valid terms, like we have the brainwave, for example. This is sometimes useful for review purposes. If you want to make sure that even if terminology is used correctly, it really fits to this context, for example, then you can flag all your correct usages of terms and verify based on the definitions or some other attributes that they really fit this content. And here you can see that you have also the term level attributes that we added, like the context sentence, the sample sentence, and the part of speech information. You can decide what kind of information to show on the right side. So if you're not interested in the grammatical information, you can just hide it. And you can also show translations here. So for example, for headsets, we have the translation in German is the same. It just has an uppercase H at the beginning. That's actually a useful feature for non-native writers if they want to verify that the term actually means what they are wanting to use. Okay, now so far we just got feedback about the items we touched by clicking somewhere or writing something. Of course, you can check your complete document or a section using the Congree toolbar. By clicking on document, the document will be checked from top to down, and a report will be generated for all of the messages. And you can use this report on the left side to go through your messages and improve your document. If a message or a term violation like this occurs multiple times, you can, of course, click on apply to the entire document. This concise view that shows you the minimized information where you have to double tap to show all the additional information. Of course, you can expand them always for all of the messages. If you're new to the software, this might be a useful aspect. Okay. So now we have seen how terminology check works. Maybe let's apply those 7 correction proposals as well. There is one thing I would like to show you as well. That is, I have a different document with various samples of term variants. So we can have a look at those as well. That's not a proper text, it's just some variation, so we can see or get an impression on the actual term variation recognition we have. So there is one style rule active that complains about the captions. I already activated for this session. Now we only have the other terms left. So as we can see, we have derivational patterns that we can find. So if we define measurement system in the term base, measuring system will be found as well. The same happens for web conference when we omit the dash, for example, or add a dash. All those recognitions work both ways. So if we would have added web conference with a dash to the term base, web conference without a dash would have been found. You can see this with cost cutting. That's the next example. So that's basically the other way around. Here we have the syntactic variation that is found. And here we have the synonym recognition, for example, of the gasoline engine. Okay, there's one last thing I would like to show you. That is the terminology research. So that's nice that we see all the information from the term base here in this view. Though it might be not enough. So it's textual information, and the benefit of seeing it right in the editor is that you don't have to leave your editor. You don't have to access your web browser, interrupt your writing process and look up information. Maybe it's just the definition or some usage attribute that fits your question, and you can use it right away from this panel and continue to work. So this speeds you up in your writing process. But sometimes you need to have a look at the picture and verify, is it really what I have in mind? Or maybe you need some other information, like does it relate to this particular product or was it relating to the other product? And in that case, you need to access the concept maps, for example, within Quickterm. And you can do this from one of those messages as well by just clicking the terminology web link button. It will then open the web browser, access the terminology database, and once you logged in, you will be redirected to the particular term you accessed, and you will also see the concept map if you have it configured properly. Sorry, that was the wrong example. But you can use this to automatically jump to the web interface and gather all the information you need from this web interface.
And you could write a feedback, for example. That would also be a use case, right? Because if you don't agree with this or the definition or something like that, you could just send feedback and say, hey guys, please fix this definition or something like that.
Yeah.
Just throwing in something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of the easy way how to access the terminology. So it's quite intuitive. You just have to start in your editor, start using Congree. It doesn't have to be turned on automatically, so you can configure if it is turned on automatically or not. It usually depends on the kind of user group you have. If you have power users, it's usually always turned on. If you have sporadic users, usually it's not turned on automatically, but enabled on request. And then you just type within your editor and get feedback from your term base and about your writing style. And that's how you can enforce your tone of voice, including your particular company wording. Okay, that was the demo part. That's also the end of our webinar. We have some takeaways that we would like to highlight. So we hope that by giving you the demo case for how to propose terms, how to work on terminology proposals, and how to use them to check your content, we have shown you how this process overall works. One important aspect here is that you have terminology, for sure. We have seen it by generating the content. The generated content had term candidates in there. So you always have terminology. It's more like a decision to have it as a process and to control it and to make use of it to strengthen your brand. That's an important insight. And another aspect is it's very easy to collect those term candidates early in the writing process. Whenever someone creates content, either by itself or by some generative AI, you can very easily extract term candidates from there. And early in the process, it's easy to standardize it and try to catch wrong decisions. So if you don't want to name something like this, you can decide on this in scope of the terminology process, and as soon as this term was found. And the later you do this, the more difficult it gets to correct all those existing documents already. Another aspect is that it's important to involve your stakeholders and to also have easy access for all your stakeholders to decide on your term base. We have seen an easy web interface. You could just log in, you had a task list that was quite concise. You had restricted information in your term data model so that you don't have to be a terminologist in order to supply a definition as a subject matter expert. It's quite easy and concise.
I'm glad you like it.
Thank you. I do. And of course, if you invest all this work to control it, it's clear that you also want to make use of it. And this is also very easy. You can just enable the plugin and have the real-time check. And whenever you create content, you get feedback about your terms, and negative terms are flagged, and you get correction proposals that can be applied. That's important because nobody has all the terms in mind. The software is kind of rigorous. When it knows a term, it will flag it everywhere. Okay. Then let's say
cool.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks also to you, Alex. There are obviously our names and our company names. We also threw in the link of our terminology conference, which unfortunately is German in language, but if you understand German, check out the website. The next conference that we're hosting will be in March in Karlsruhe, actually, home of Congree. So you're hosting us again. As to questions, there were a few questions in the chat. One of them you already answered, which was, how does Congree actually fetch the terminology from Quickterm? And you mentioned that it's the term sync process that gets the terminology via API calls. So it's direct. There's no export import you need to do or something like that. There was another question in there. I think you briefly mentioned it in the intro, but there was another question whether this verification, so your plugin, only works in Microsoft Word or whether there are other environments. I know that in your chart you have all the plugins, but maybe you can give 3 sentences around, what environments you can use that in.
Yeah, good question. So we usually have editor integrations in all the major text creation systems. So Word and the other Office suite parts like PowerPoint, Excel, and Outlook are integrated as well. We have integrations in all sorts of XML editors like Oxygen, for example, or FrameMaker, structured and unstructured, to XMetal and to Arbortext editor. We also have deep integrations into CCMS systems, into various ones, like, for example, Xeasoft CCMS or AutoEd or maybe Quanos or Docufy. That's more like the German market-based CCMS. We also have browser extensions. So if you have some arbitrary web page, basically, where you create textual content, you can use the browser plugin to check web pages. You can actually also use it within Quickterm itself to check your definitions, for example, because we also have rules to check definitions if they are written according to your guidelines.
Yeah, we threw that out of the demo because it would take another hour, the whole thing, and we're already a little bit over time. There was another interesting question, Alex, about all the awards and certificates you have on the wall behind you. I don't know if that's something you want to share or if it's embarrassing.
They're not mine.
There we go.
They're from my dad. He is a professional cook, and he has
cool.
participated in various cooking contests, and the wall continues a bit. So it's not even everything. So all the medals and purples are somewhere else.
Cool. You look quite slim for that.
Yeah, that's a matter of perspective, I would say.
Or you're using a camera that makes you smaller. All right, yeah, those were all the questions that I saw. So again, thanks a lot. If you do want to contact us, you can find our details. There will be a mailing, of course, afterwards that sends out the link of the recording, that sends out the slides. So thank you for everybody who joined us online. And if you're watching the recording at twice the speed, probably, then yeah, I hope you enjoyed the recording and talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.